Hello, my name's Matt. I'm production director at Cyberduck, who have kindly put together this event. In my role, I mainly do UX design and that kind of thing. And I'm here with my colleague Ramon.
I'm Ramon Lapenta. I'm front-end developer. I'm in charge of putting the UX part into production websites.
And as Harry mentioned, our talk is about adaptive from an agency perspective. Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd be sort of in a product-based environment and sort of able to control everything ourselves. But as an agency, you're answerable to clients. So, sort of how those constraints sort of reflect in our process towards adaptive design. And we've been doing adaptive now for about a year. So we sort of go through a few of our experiences of what we've sort of learned so far from adaptive. So I think we'll be covering sort of why do adaptive, which I think the two first presentations probably have covered pretty well. Discussing adaptive UX and responsive layouts and sort of our approaches towards that, and sensors, so the way that sort of the browser interprets how to display the website, and then the sort of challenges that sort of come with that. So I'll hand you over.
What we have out there. We are now facing what people have available in their whatever device they use to browse the web, which is what we focus on. And we have native apps, and we have the adaptive website, we have web apps, and we have the non-scalables that are the all websites, fixed and non-scalable websites. And
we found sort of quite often in a sort of client setting, we're pitching to clients that adaptive websites are a lot more attractive proposition to clients because of the fact that they can be developed quickly and deployed for any device. They're less costly because you're not having to develop natively for each different device that you're proposing to do an app for, and the scalability, which comes with sort of the speed of it as well, that you can deploy on any device, because that's the point of that adaptive web design. So we found that sort of in terms of pitching to clients, it's actually quite easy to sort of pitch adaptive because it is something that your website will work sort of whether it's on a mobile device, on a tablet, or whether it's somebody browsing on their PlayStation, your website will work, and that I think that's something that's quite attractive to clients.
And you will show the same content in every device.
And what you're doing instead, rather than sort of instead of just scaling the website, what you're actually doing is adapting user experience. So whether if it's based on context of, say, somebody using a touch device, you're optimizing the user experience for touch, and likewise for desktop, sort of mouse and keyboard. So some of the main considerations for adaptive web design, obviously, who are your users? So what are they using? And this is something we have to do sort of at the start of every project, is actually look at currently the traffic for the client that we're working for, and sort of understand a bit more about sort of who their users are and what sort of context they're using the website, so how they're inputting information, so whether it's keyboard, mouse, touch, or some other kind of interaction method.
So for the content, what kind of content are you presenting to your users, and how are we going to deal with the different devices to show that content in the best way, the best possible way?
So, I mean, it's probably very clear from the first couple of speeches, but designing for devices and designing for particular breakpoints, that trying to cover absolutely every device is impossible if you're trying to design that, and sort of trying to control how it looks exactly the same on every device is also impossible. So what we do at Cyberduck is we focus on what we call key breakpoints. So breakpoints in the design that we can say, okay, that's a full width desktop experience. That's, say, a smaller desktop or landscape tablet, or mobile, or say smaller tablet device. So we pick out key breakpoints of that's the sort of the devices that we're going to particularly try to optimize for, but allow obviously the design to fluidly and gracefully sort of
fit in between all those breakpoints.
So often when we come to a client project, the first point is Google Analytics to have a look at sort of their current traffic and have a look at sort of the trends that are going on, so we can see sort of what the best sort of breakpoints that we can pick out from that are. So on the example we'll be sort of showing you in this presentation, sort of we saw that main traffic was coming from iPhone and iPad. So we wanted to sort of optimize the experiences for those, but obviously not sort of reduce the user experience
for everything else.
Exactly. So here are a couple of sort of very crude drawings, and this is the sort of process we go through at the very start of the project. It's sort of when we're planning layouts and we're doing some very crude wireframing. We're sort of planning. Okay, what are the sort of the key breakpoints that we're sort of looking to optimize for, and how we're optimizing that content, and sort of how we're handling the grid with those breakpoints. And sort of the question that sort of when we first were sort of approaching adaptive web design that came out was, do we go with fluid columns, or do we go for less columns that we just stack, and we just stack the content and we'll allow the content to basically devise how the interface is displayed. So the problem with fluid percentage-based grids is that as you sort of shrink them down, if you're just going for one grid, and let's say it's a 960 grid, and you just sort of scale it down, you end up with gutters that tiny and columns which basically they can't actually display the content in the way, so it's not actually optimized for anything. On the flip side to that, with fixed width grids, you end up sort of trying to control too much of how the interface is supposed to look. So you're sort of saying, okay, well, this is the iPad site, this is the iPhone site, and this is my main desktop site, and there's no in between. Those are my sites. You know, if you're on a Galaxy tab, deal with it. You're in between, so you end up getting the mobile user experience because you don't have a device big enough for the iPad version. So this is where we sort of devise the breakpoints to come in, that we basically say, okay, well, it's fluid between these breakpoints, and there's quite a few sort of CSS frameworks already out there which actually could help people get up and running quite quickly with adaptive websites, responsive websites, because this is just basically layout. So there's obviously already tools out there that can sort of help people do that. But is a responsive grid enough on its own? And our answer to that is no. I think we need to think more about the context of how the user uses the website, and sort of how they're actually interacting with your website, and why they're using your website in each scenario. So for example, if you're, say, looking at, say, a tablet-sized device, tailor your UX for the lowest common denominator, which is somebody's big ugly fingers trying to use your website rather than what is much more precise, which is a mouse. So in this example here, we've got a navigation system that's the desktop there at the top, and then when we scale down to mobile, we change the menu completely, because that type of navigation system is just not going to work on mobile, because your font's too big to be able to click the links, and it's not optimized for how people are going to use it. So instead, we sort of, as the website adapts, we go to change the layout a little bit. So we move the logo down, we put the menu at the top, so more sort of like a traditional native app, that then you can click that and you get everything on the website.
Talking here about the sensors, we call sensors to the technology we use to detect which device is the user viewing the website. And there's four main type of sensors. The first one is the media queries, that is only CSS. That means it's in the client side, and it's only handled by the CSS, and it's only detects side screen. And then we have screen size detection with JavaScript, which does basically the same, support is different, and there's we have feature detection that is more the approach we're taking with the adaptive web design, because we can actually test in the browser what that browser can actually do, and then present that feature in the website so the user can make use of that. And the latest one is from the backend, knowing which device is making the request to the server. So we send back only what is necessary to that particular device. There is pros and cons to each one, and they kind of overlap each other in many aspects. For example, in CSS, media queries is very easy to implement. It's only a few lines of code, and then just kind of adapt the code for each device. It's very powerful on the client side, but it doesn't have a great support yet, mostly on the Microsoft side of the browsers, and it cannot handle server calls. You can hide things, you can adapt images, you can adapt size of videos, but you cannot prevent a big image, for example, of being loaded to the device. The JavaScript is good in the way that we can test more than just the screen size, and we can do more with the features that we want to apply to the website. And it helps with interactivity. We can, like in the previous talk, know what touch input actions and all that, and do something with it. The bad thing about that is accessibility can be compromised sometimes if it's not very well planned and very well implemented. And realizing JavaScript is sometimes it's not available and it's not so easy to implement. In the backend, detecting the browser, the best feature we get from this is that we can serve only what that browser is capable of showing, instead of sending everything to the device and then handle it in the client side. It's not easy to implement. It really, mostly now that many devices have these functions to cheat the server, sending a different user agent string and basically telling that it is a different browser.
So, based on that, what are the challenges? In the first presentation, quite rightly, you mentioned that sort of mobile first is the right approach to go, which is obviously being sort of supported by quite a few proponents in the industry, such as Luke W and people like that. Then to sort of look at images and video and how we handle that in adaptive web design. And then other things like forms, tables, testing, and sort of the challenges for an agency approach to adaptive web design and what those present. So, as an agency, obviously we understand the sort of the idea behind mobile first, but often it can be impractical. That can be based on the sort of the type of client. So it could be a client's more familiar with a website, sort of traditional desktop sort of website. So presenting them with designs based on that first, and then sort of designing the rest of the site based on that, and sort of adapting the rest of the site based on that. Sometimes I think is easier to get clients involved in the process. And then in terms of how the CSS loads, it can really depend as well, because it can be based on the traffic of the site. If a client site is still getting sort of a large proportion of IE7 and IE8 traffic, then sort of mobile first is perhaps not the best way to go, because you're going to have to get sort of hacky, sort of with overriding
rules and loading more than it should be.
The second point is adaptive images. So as Ramon mentioned, obviously display none doesn't actually work for adaptive layouts, because that content's still being downloaded, whether it's on a full site or whether it's on a mobile site where the image is not being shown.
But even if the device is capable of showing that image or even resize the images, maybe there's considerations on traffic or data users on device that you are paying for every megabyte that you're getting on your device. So that's something that we have to consider.
And the other obvious consideration is the fact that people, if they're using a mobile or tablet device, they may well not be using the same kind of speeds of internet that their desktop machine is capable of. They might well be using 3G. So not only are you downloading content that you're not even seeing, it's exacerbated the problem because
you're paying for it,
and it's loading everything much slower. There have been sort of several discussions we've had about this and sort of whether to use low-res images, sort of whether that's a solution. We found not, basically, because the problem with a lot of more modern sort of smartphones and touchscreen devices is that they have a higher pixel density than, say, your average desktop screen. So therefore, you're loading an already low-res image, but then it sort of looks even worse on those devices because of the high pixel density ratio. The good thing is it doesn't apply to background images, because background images are in the CSS, so therefore you can use media queries to actually not load those background images at all. So that's one good thing to come out of that.
The background images don't get downloaded to the device until they're necessary.
So one sort of workaround we found towards this is scaling images using JavaScript feature detection. So basically, we start off with a low-res version of the image, which then scales up to high-res versions based on the capabilities of the browser. So the absolute default is low-res, and then it scales upwards. However, like anything, there is a problem with that, because it requires the user to have JavaScript enabled, which if they don't have JavaScript enabled, it means that we have to then sort of again get messy in the code and have to put no script tags around image elements and things like that. So it's not a perfect solution. Here's an example of a responsive image on a website we built. So we've got on the right a desktop which is full width of the screen, but then on mobile this particular image was really important for the client to show to people. So on mobile it then sort of changes the image which is loaded based on the fact that the device is based on a different screen width.
Video, that's been a nightmare.
So as Ramon said, video has presented us with several problems on projects we've worked on, because different devices treat video differently, and often sort of if you're using something like YouTube or Vimeo, you have even less control because it's third party, and you're relying on that third party to be able to sort of optimize their content for various devices. And a good example of this is a recent project where we had YouTube video content on the website as well as the rest of the content, and on Android and various tablet devices it worked absolutely fine. On iPhone it sort of sometimes it would load in the YouTube native app, sometimes it would load full screen on the page, and sometimes it just wouldn't load at all.
Sometimes YouTube will send a flash version of the video so it won't show anything on the iPad. And then sort of our other considerations are if you've got a website that say has lots of forms, so if, let's say it's a SaaS application that people need to fill stuff in to get charts or whatever out of it, so it's a financial application. Obviously long forms full stop are bad usability, but sort of you can design forms so that they're sort of split into steps and they're logical and that kind of thing. But on a mobile, you're still having to fill out all of those fields. And obviously on mobile, you can tell the device sort of load this default type of keyboard. So you can say, okay, if it's let's say a phone number field, load sort of the keyboard with numbers. Numbers from the app and .com at the end if it's a URL field. But still, it's
And similarly, data tables. So if you've got a website, we obviously have various websites which have members areas where people can log in and download reports and do that, all of that kind of stuff. On mobile, that presents itself a bit of a challenge because then you have to decide, okay, how am I going to display all of these? Let's say there's 5 columns in this table. How am I going to display that on mobile in one column? So that presents itself with a challenge. And then at the end of the day, it comes down to context. If the form is going to be something that somebody's likely to be filling in on mobile, then you obviously need to optimize it for mobile. But if it's something that's the user's not likely to use, then perhaps you should consider not actually having it on the mobile side and sort of removing that sort of content from there. The biggest sort of query with this is e-commerce on mobile and sort of optimizing e-commerce on mobile, because the fact that many e-commerce sites aren't optimized for mobile because of these very reasons, because they've got forms and things like that, and sort of you're having to fill in sort of credit card information and all that kind of stuff. That basically mobile sites are probably losing a lot of retailers a lot of money because of the fact they're not optimized. So it's looking at context and sort of trying to understand your users a bit more. So what's next for CyberDuck and Adaptive? Well, ideally we'd like to see some improvements to the HTML5 specification to sort of allow things like responsive images to be set to be device specific. So you can sort of have a different tag in there that basically will say whether it's one device or another, that it displays different types of images.
and the same thing for videos. It would be nice if they could all agree in one format.
Web design itself, as well as Adaptive, is still in its infancy, and CyberDuck, like everybody, I think we still have a lot to learn. So it's sort of being able to sort of take a sort of fresh approach to every project and sort of learn from the things that you did on the last project that didn't work so well, and sort of try to sort of do it better on the next project. So thank you. That was our presentation.